Imagine Canada's cutting-edge aerospace industry suddenly facing an existential threat. The whispers around the Gripen deal are growing louder, and the implications for Canadian aviation are far more significant than you might think. We're uncovering the untold story of how this agreement could fundamentally alter our aerospace future and what that means for every Canadian. Canada's defense and aerospace strategy has long followed a familiar rhythm. When it came to fighter jets, the choices were predictable: American-built aircraft, NATO standard platforms, and procurement paths that rarely strayed from tradition. Surprises were rare in this carefully choreographed world. But then came a twist that caught almost everyone off guard: the Gripen deal. Few had anticipated it, and even fewer understood its full implications. Inside industry boardrooms and government halls, the reactions weren't marked by cheers or optimism. Instead, they were dominated by confusion, hesitation, and speculation. The questions began pouring in. Was the Gripen truly aligned with Canada's strategic needs? Or was this an experiment with risks far greater than the rewards? What was perhaps most telling was the silence from the aerospace industry itself. Normally, a new fighter jet contract sparks excitement, new jobs, fresh partnerships, and the promise of technological breakthroughs. But this time, the atmosphere was uneasy. Some insiders suggested the decision was more political than industrial, more about appearances than long-term growth. And this is where the deeper story begins. On the surface, the Gripen is sleek, cost-efficient, and battle-proven. But beneath that polished exterior lies a troubling reality, one that could send shockwaves through Canada's aerospace industry. From manufacturing and R&D to international collaborations, the Gripen deal may not be the opportunity it appears to be, but rather a looming threat. This isn't just the story of buying a fighter jet. This is the story of Canada's aerospace identity, and whether the nation has just opened the door to innovation or unknowingly walked into its own downfall.
When Canada first signaled its intent to modernize its fighter fleet, all eyes naturally turned toward the F-35. It was the expected choice, the flagship of NATO allies, the crown jewel of American air power, and the aircraft Canada had already invested years of evaluation into. On paper, the F-35 seemed inevitable, and yet Canada pivoted. The Gripen emerged as the frontrunner, leaving many to ask why abandon the world's most advanced stealth fighter for Sweden's smaller, less hyped alternative. The official reasoning was simple enough: cost. The Gripen comes with a far smaller price tag than the F-35, both in procurement and in long-term maintenance. For a government balancing defense needs with budgetary pressures, this was an attractive value proposition. Then came the promise of industrial offsets. Saab didn't just offer jets, they offered partnerships, local jobs, technology transfers, and the potential for Canadian firms to have a seat at the table in future aerospace development. For politicians, that meant more than defense capability. It meant votes, growth, and domestic impact. And finally, there was the argument of autonomy. Unlike the F-35, with its tightly controlled American software and lockdown systems, the Gripen was presented as a fighter Canada could truly call its own. More flexibility, less dependency on Washington. On the surface, this looked like a bold move towards strategic independence. But here's the catch. What was said publicly and what might actually unfold are two very different things. While officials painted the Gripen as a win-win scenario, cheaper, more independent, more Canadian, industry insiders warned that these promises may not hold up under the harsh realities of global defense politics. So, was this really a forward-thinking choice for Canada's sovereignty? Or a gamble dressed up as strategy? The truth, as we'll uncover, may be far more complicated than the polished headlines suggested.
Every major defense deal comes with promises of growth and opportunity, but behind the curtain, there are always hidden costs. And for Canada's aerospace industry, the Gripen deal could unleash consequences far more painful than expected. Let's start with the obvious: established Canadian aerospace companies. For decades, these firms have thrived under contracts linked to American platforms like the F-18 and the F-35 program. Entire business models, from avionics development to simulation systems, were built on the expectation of American partnerships. With the Gripen, much of that certainty vanishes overnight. Then there are the jobs. Politicians may highlight the promise of new opportunities through industrial offsets, but industry insiders see another story, one of disruption. When foreign technology takes center stage, Canadian engineers and technicians risk being sidelined. Investment that once flowed into indigenous R&D projects could instead be redirected toward adapting foreign systems. The result? A generation of Canadian innovation at risk of being stalled, or worse, lost. And it doesn't stop there. Consider the supply chains, the thousands of small and mid-sized firms across Canada that quietly keep aerospace manufacturing alive. Many of them are deeply integrated with US and NATO-linked projects. A sudden pivot to Gripen means retooling, renegotiating, and in some cases, being cut out entirely. These smaller manufacturers are the backbone of the industry, and they may be the first to feel the shockwaves. So, while the Gripen deal is publicly painted as a bold new chapter, the reality beneath the surface may be very different. It could be layoffs, stalled research, weakened supply chains, and a Canadian aerospace sector slowly losing the competitive edge it has worked so hard to build. The question isn't just what Canada gains from Gripen, it's what Canada stands to lose.
Every choice comes with trade-offs, and in choosing Gripen, Canada may have shut the door on opportunities that could have propelled its aerospace industry to new heights. Consider what an alternative fighter acquisition, particularly the F-35, might have meant. Beyond its stealth and advanced capabilities, the F-35 program comes with deep industrial integration across dozens of nations. Canadian firms already had footholds in that ecosystem, producing components and technologies that fed directly into one of the most ambitious aerospace projects in history. A larger commitment could have expanded those opportunities, fueling domestic innovation, R&D growth, and long-term partnerships that reach far beyond military contracts. By stepping away, Canada risks more than just a different aircraft. It risks its place at the global table. In an era where aerospace is as much about high-tech collaboration as it is about national defense, Canada could slowly find itself sidelined. Not a leader, not a partner, but a customer. And in this business, customers rarely shape the future. The long-term implications are sobering. Will Canada remain a global aerospace player, or will its industry become dependent on foreign systems, always adapting but rarely innovating? What happens to the next generation of aerospace projects, advanced drones, sixth-generation fighters, space defense platforms? Will Canada shape them or merely buy them off the shelf? These are not just questions about aircraft. They are questions about national identity, about whether Canada's aerospace future will be written in its own factories and laboratories or dictated by others.
Canada now stands at a crossroads. The Gripen deal, for better or worse, has reshaped the trajectory of its aerospace industry. But while the challenges are real, job risks, weakened supply chains, and missed opportunities, this is not the end of the story. There are strategies Canada can still deploy to mitigate the damage and reclaim its role as a global aerospace leader. The first is adaptation, ensuring Canadian companies aren't just passive recipients of foreign technology, but active partners in reshaping it. By demanding stronger technology transfers and co-development agreements, Canada can turn dependency into opportunity. The second strategy lies in leveraging existing strengths. Canada remains a powerhouse in niche aerospace fields, from advanced simulation and training systems to composite materials and space technology. Doubling down on these areas could help Canadian firms remain globally competitive, even as the fighter jet market evolves. And finally, collaboration. The future of aerospace isn't just about jets, it's about integration with space, drones, AI, and next-generation defense systems. If Canada positions itself now as a leader in these emerging sectors, it can offset the vulnerabilities created by the Gripen decision and carve out a role that is forward-looking, not backward-facing. Because in the end, this story isn't just about what Canada might lose, it's about what Canada can still build. The resilience of its engineers, the innovation of its companies, and the vision of its policymakers will decide whether this chapter becomes a cautionary tale or the beginning of a new aerospace renaissance. The horizon isn't closed, it's waiting to be rebuilt. The only question is, will Canada rise to the challenge?
If you found this analysis insightful, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to Skyjet Wings, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next exploration into the skies. Because at Skyjet Wings, we don't just report aviation news, we take you inside the cockpit of the future.